Ask anyone on the planet to name American food and watch the same three words fall out of their mouth. Burger, hot dog, done. Maybe a fourth if they're feeling generous, and remember fries exist. And that, right there, is one of the most spectacular misunderstandings in the entire history of eating. Because the United States doesn't have a cuisine. It has dozens of them, stacked on top of each other, most of them older than the country itself. All of them convinced the others are doing it wrong, all of them ready to fight. What you're about to hear is not a list of sandwiches. It's a civil war that happens to be delicious, and nobody, anywhere, agrees on a single thing. Here's the first thing you have to throw out the window. The idea that American food is one thing. It was never one thing. The country is so absurdly enormous and so climatically deranged that what a person eats in the Arizona desert has nothing, absolutely nothing, to do with what a person eats on the rocky coast of Maine. We're talking about a landmass where you can drive for 4 days and still be inside the same nation, watching the food change underneath you like a slow-motion costume change. Mountains, swamps, deserts, prairies, 2 oceans and a gulf, each one growing something different and feeding people who never met. And the engine driving all of it, every single bite, is 2 things working in tandem: immigration and what we'll politely call cultural borrowing. Everyone who arrived brought a recipe. Everyone who was already here had their recipes taken. Wave after wave of people stepped off boats and trains with a grandmother's dish in their memory, found that the ingredients were wrong, improvised, and accidentally invented something new that their descendants now defend as ancient and sacred. The result is the most chaotic, mongrel, contradictory dinner table on earth, where half the dishes are claimed by 3 different groups, none of them are speaking to each other, and all of them are absolutely certain they're the original. So let's start in the South, because the South is where this country keeps its soul, culinarily speaking. And it will fight you over that statement and several others. Soul food is the cuisine born from the kitchens of enslaved African Americans, people who were handed the parts of the animal nobody else wanted and the scraps off the bottom of the barrel and turned them into the most comforting, devastatingly good food the country has ever produced. This is alchemy, not cooking. Fried chicken so iconic the rest of the world now thinks it's the entire story of America on a plate. Cornbread, which every single grandmother makes correctly and every other grandmother makes wrong. And the great schism here is sugar. Put sugar in your cornbread in the wrong county and you've announced to the room that you are not to be trusted with anything important. Collard greens stewed for hours with a piece of smoked pork until they surrender, completely served with the pot liquor, the dark broth left behind, which you sop up with the bread because throwing it out is a small crime. Black-eyed peas eaten on New Year's Day for luck, because apparently the legumes are in charge of your destiny now, paired with greens that supposedly represent money, so the whole meal is essentially a financial ritual you can chew. Mac and cheese that shows up not as a side but as a full member of the plate with voting rights. Candied yams, sweet enough to be dessert that somehow sit next to the meat anyway. And chitlins, which are pig intestines, cleaned for hours and simmered low, and which I will simply present to you the way they're presented at the table, with total confidence and a faint smell that announces them from the next room before they ever arrive. The unwritten rule of soul food is that you do not, under any circumstances, ask a Southern cook to share the exact recipe. They will tell you. They will smile while they tell you. They will leave out one ingredient on purpose, every time, and they will take that missing ingredient to the grave with the serene satisfaction of someone who has won. And then there's barbecue, which is not a food in the South. It is a religion with 4 warring denominations, and recommending the wrong one to the wrong person is genuinely how friendships end and family reunions go silent. We need to be precise here, because people have built their entire identities on these hills. North Carolina does whole hog, the entire pig, chopped and dressed in a thin sauce of vinegar and pepper in the eastern half, while the western half adds a little tomato and calls it Lexington style, and these 2 halves of one single state will not eat at the same table over a difference most outsiders cannot even taste. Memphis is about pork, ribs specifically, and the war there is dry versus wet, whether you rub the spice on and leave it or paint the sauce on at the end. And the city holds an enormous championship every year to settle a question that is by design unsettleable. Texas, and we will absolutely be coming back to Texas, declares that barbecue means beef, brisket, smoked for 14 hours over post oak by a man who hasn't slept, and refers to the bark on the outside with the tenderness most people reserve for children. Kansas City, the great diplomat, slathers everything, pork, beef, chicken, anything that holds still, in a thick, sweet, tomato and molasses sauce, and is quietly resented by the other 3 for the crime of being too easy to like. The thing about barbecue is that every pitmaster on earth believes his particular region personally invented fire and smoke. They are all wrong. And they will all, given the slightest opening, explain to you for the next 2 hours exactly why they're right, while the meat gets cold and you slowly age. Slide a little further down and you fall into Louisiana, which is less a state than its own small planet with its own gravity. This is where French, African, Spanish, and native roots all got thrown into one pot a few centuries ago and simply refused to leave. And you have to understand the difference between Cajun and Creole, or the entire region will quietly file you under doesn't get it forever. Cajun is the rustic country cooking, the food of the bayou and the swamp. One big pot, a dark roux cooked slow until it's the color of chocolate, built by people who had to make a little stretch a long way. Creole is the refined city cousin, born in the kitchens of New Orleans, with tomatoes and things, more butter, and a permanent sense of occasion. Gumbo is the beating heart of all of it, a thick stew thickened either with okra or with filet, which is ground sassafras leaf. And the question of whether tomatoes belong in gumbo is one you ask only if you specifically want to detonate a dinner party. Jambalaya is the great rice dish, and here the Creole version is red and proud of its tomatoes, while the Cajun version is brown and would like everyone to know, with quiet menace, that it is the original. Crawfish etouffee smothers little mudbugs in a buttery, peppery sauce ladled over rice, and the whole region builds a spring ritual around boiling crawfish by the literal sack, dumping them steaming onto newspaper-covered tables, and sucking the heads, which sounds genuinely appalling, and is in fact where all the flavor hides. And they will tell you to suck the heads with a completely straight face as though it's the most normal instruction in the world. And the po' boy, the great Louisiana sandwich, which must be built on a specific local French loaf, with a shattering crust and a cottony inside, stuffed with fried shrimp or oysters and dressed, which means lettuce, tomato, mayo. The moment you put it on the wrong bread, a born New Orleanian's eye begins to twitch, and something inside them quietly dies. And beignets, the square fried donuts buried under a snowstorm of powdered sugar, which exist mostly so tourists can inhale at the wrong moment and decorate their entire shirt. Now let's leave the heat behind and shoot straight up to New England, where the entire personality of the cuisine can be summarized as, we live next to extremely cold water, and we fully intend to eat whatever is in it. The defining obsession is seafood, and the defining war, naturally, is about a soup. Clam chowder. New England clam chowder is creamy white, thick enough that a spoon stands up in it on its own, full of potatoes and salt pork and clams, and the people who make it consider it the only chowder that has ever legitimately existed. Manhattan clam chowder is red, made with tomatoes, thinner, and in the actual state of Maine, a legislator once introduced a real bill to make it illegal to put tomatoes in chowder. That is not an exaggeration for the video. A legislative body, with other things presumably to do, sat down and formally addressed the tomato question. New England loves its clam chowder the way other nations love a flag. Then there's the lobster roll, the crown jewel of Maine, which sparks its own quieter but no less bitter feud. Cold lobster meat bound with a little mayonnaise, the Maine style, versus warm lobster meat drenched in melted butter, the Connecticut style. And the two camps regard each other across the table like rival monarchies who haven't gone to war yet only because they're both eating. The clam bake rounds out the picture. An entire feast of lobster, clams, mussels, corn, and potatoes buried in a sandpit on the beach over hot stones and seaweed, which is less a meal than a coastal religious ceremony with a tan. And, looming over absolutely all of it is the ghost of the Pilgrims, those buckle-hatted 17th century arrivals whose single shared harvest dinner with the Wampanoag mutated over 400 years into Thanksgiving, the most important food day in the entire country. The one day a year when the whole nation eats roughly the same enormous meal at the same time, and then immediately starts fighting about whether the stuffing belongs inside the bird or in its own dish, and whether canned cranberry sauce that holds the ridged shape of the can is an abomination or, correctly, the best part. If you're enjoying this controlled act of culinary chaos, do the thing. The like, the subscribe, whatever the button says today. Mostly because somewhere out there a man is already preparing to tell me that brisket isn't real barbecue and that I clearly know nothing, and I would simply like the numbers on my side when he arrives. It's not for me, it's for the brisket. Anyway, where were we? Right, we were trying to leave New England before somebody made us pick a chowder and a side. Because you cannot talk about the Northeast and quietly skip New York. And New York absolutely refuses to be a footnote in anyone else's story. The city is an entire cuisine unto itself, built almost completely by immigrants who arrived hungry, broke, and stubborn, and immediately started cooking their way into the place. New York pizza is thin, wide, foldable, blistered, sold by the slice, and eaten on the move. And a New Yorker will inform you that it is the water, the specific New York City tap water in the dough, that makes the crust impossible to truly replicate anywhere else on Earth. And they say this with the unshakable certainty of a scientist who has never once run the experiment and never intends to. The bagel. And a real bagel is boiled first and then baked. Dense and chewy and never fluffy. Topped with cream cheese and lox, which is silky cured salmon. And a genuine New Yorker holds detailed and unmovable opinions about which specific corner shop does it correctly, that they will defend like family honor in a duel. Pastrami and corned beef piled obscenely, architecturally high on rye in the Ashkenazi Jewish deli tradition. Sandwiches so tall they are structurally unsound and an engineering risk. Handed to you by men who have been gently insulting their regular customers for 50 years as a recognized form of affection. The black and white cookie, half chocolate and half vanilla icing. The egg cream that contains neither egg nor cream, and somehow nobody finds this strange. The niche, the everything bagel that leaves a trail of its identity everywhere you go. And the hot dog from a steaming metal cart on the corner, dressed in onions and mustard, eaten standing up, against the wind, washed down with the entire restless culture of the deli, the bodega, and the food cart. A place where the food never stops moving because nobody eating it ever stops moving either. Now swing hard inland to the Midwest, the great agricultural heartland, the region that quietly grows the food that feeds everyone else and then gets called boring as its reward. This is the land of plenty, of endless corn and cattle and German, Scandinavian, and Polish grandmothers. And the food reflects exactly that lineage, hearty, generous, unpretentious, and faintly suspicious of any spice it doesn't already know. The hot dish of Minnesota is the regional sacrament, a casserole baked in a single dish containing ground meat, vegetables, a can of condensed soup acting as the mortar, and a golden roof of crispy tater tots on top. And it materializes at every funeral, potluck, and church basement gathering across the upper Midwest like a comforting and inescapable law of physics. This is the Corn Belt, where the humble hamburger reaches its fullest and proudest expression, where a pork tenderloin gets pounded out wider than the bun it's served on for reasons of pure regional pride, and where beef is not a meal so much as a birthright. Chicago deep dish pizza is a completely separate argument with its own enemies. A pizza so tall and structural it is essentially a savory pie, with the cheese on the bottom and the sauce ladled on top, eaten with a knife and fork like a civilized monster. And New Yorkers flatly refuse to acknowledge it as pizza at all, while Chicagoans serenely refuse to acknowledge the existence of the criticism. And the Chicago hot dog, dragged through an entire garden, yellow mustard, chopped onion, bright green relish, a pickle spear, tomato wedges, sport peppers, and a dusting of celery salt, all on a poppy seed bun, on which there exists exactly one ironclad, non-negotiable commandment carved into the city's soul: never, under any circumstances, ketchup. Put ketchup on a Chicago dog, and a complete stranger will physically intervene to save you from yourself. Cross the border into Wisconsin, and you find the bratwurst simmered in beer, the deep beer culture itself, the fried cheese curds that squeak against your teeth when they're fresh, and a devotion to cheese so total and so sincere that grown adults wear large foam wedges of it on their heads in public, on purpose, at sporting events, as a proud and permanent statement of identity. And the chaos doesn't stop there, because Cincinnati, with full confidence, serves a chili made with cinnamon and chocolate poured over spaghetti and buried in a haystack of shredded cheese, a dish the rest of the country stares at in open disbelief, while Cincinnatians eat it 3 ways, 4 ways, 5 ways, and dare you to say something. St. Louis flattens its pizza into a cracker and tops it with a processed cheese blend that exists nowhere else and defends it. The whole region runs on the quiet, stubborn pride of people the coasts forgot to take seriously. And now we arrive at Texas and the Southwest, where I have to stop the train and be completely honest with you for a second, because this is the home of one of the great culinary misunderstandings of the entire planet. Tex-Mex is its own thing. It is genuinely, gloriously delicious. And it is not Mexican food, no matter what the menu font is trying to suggest. Chili con carne, that deep bowl of spiced beef, born on the Texas side of the border and not in Mexico at all, where the single most violent local question is whether beans are allowed in it. Ask a Texan and the answer is an offended no. Ask almost anyone else and the answer is an obvious yes. And that small disagreement has ended more conversations than politics. Fajitas, sizzling and theatrical on their dramatic little cast iron skillet that announces your order to the entire restaurant. The burrito the size and approximate weight of a newborn, wrapped tight as a sleeping bag, which barely exists in Mexico in that form. Nachos buried under a molten blanket of yellow cheese, hard-shell tacos that crack and shower your lap with filling, queso, the warm cheese dip that is, let's be honest, the actual reason anyone keeps ordering chips. These are all border inventions, American creations wearing a borrowed sombrero, and a traditional Mexican grandmother would not recognize half of them and might be offended by the other half. That does not make any of it worse. It just makes it honest about being something genuinely new. And right next door, the cuisine of New Mexico takes the chili pepper and elevates it into an entire identity, an entire personality, where the official state question, written into actual law, is red or green, referring to which roasted chili sauce you want smothering your food, and asking for both at once is so common it earned its own single-word answer, Christmas. An entire state organized, governed, and emotionally regulated around a pepper. You have to respect the focus. And out in Arizona, the Sonoran hot dog wraps the humble frankfurter in bacon, buries it in beans, onions, and salsa, and quietly makes the case that the border between Tex-Mex and Mexican was always more of a suggestion than a wall. Then the whole land tilts west toward the Pacific, and everything quietly changes again. Because California woke up one day in the 1970s and collectively decided that food should be about the ingredient itself, full stop. California cuisine is the cult of the fresh, the local, the seasonal, the menu that changes every week because the farm down the road changed what it picked. The near-spiritual worship of the avocado to a degree that occasionally borders on concerning for the people involved. This is the birthplace of the gourmet food truck, the relentless and fearless fusion with every single Asian cuisine within driving distance. The place where a taco can be filled with Korean barbecue and a burrito can be stuffed with sushi rice and absolutely nobody blinks or asks permission. San Francisco anchors the whole movement with its tangy sourdough, its mission burritos packed like cannonballs, and a deep, almost monastic obsession with doing everything slowly and from scratch, with total reverence while gently and silently judging anyone who reaches for a shortcut. The ciappino, a seafood stew the Italian immigrant fishermen built right on the wharf from whatever the boats hauled in that morning. The whole West Coast is the bright, lean, modern counterpoint to all that deep-fried Southern history. Greener, lighter, drizzled in olive oil, and utterly, serenely certain that it personally has figured out the future of how the entire species should eat, which is, when you think about it, an extremely Californian thing to be that certain about. And further up the coast, the Pacific Northwest plays its own quieter game entirely. Built on wild salmon, planked over cedar, Dungeness crab, oysters pulled straight from cold gray water, forage mushrooms, and an obsession with coffee so intense it spawned an empire. A region where the food is humble, damp, and absolutely convinced the Californians are trying too hard. And then, way out alone in the middle of the ocean, there's Hawaii, which honestly deserves its own full video and may very well get one before this is over. Hawaiian food is a glorious, dense collision of native Polynesian, Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, and Portuguese influences, plus one genuinely bewildering American military contribution we'll get to in a second. Poke is the now world-famous bowl of raw, cubed, seasoned fish over rice, which the rest of the planet breathlessly discovered about 10 minutes ago, and which Hawaii has been quietly eating since long before anyone put it on a chalkboard menu in your city for $14. The plate lunch is the working person's foundational meal, a hot protein next to 2 firm scoops of white rice and a side of macaroni salad, balanced, heavy, and built for an actual day of labor. Kalua pig, a whole pig slow-cooked underground for hours in an emu, a buried oven of hot rocks, until it pulls apart into smoke and salt. Loco Moco, a magnificent and unapologetic pile of white rice topped with a hamburger patty, a fried egg, and a flood of brown gravy, comfort engineered into a single bowl. And then, towering over everything, there is Spam. Hawaiians eat more Spam per person than anywhere else in the entire United States, a passionate love affair that began with canned military rations during the war and simply never ever ended. Immortalized forever in Spam musubi, a glistening slab of pan-fried Spam pressed onto a block of rice and bound with a strip of seaweed like a piece of sushi that proudly enlisted in the army. It sounds, on paper, like a clear mistake. It is, in the hand, a genuine delicacy. Both of those things are completely true at the same time, and that is the entire spirit of the islands. There's also seimin, the local noodle soup that grew out of plantation workers from a dozen different countries sharing lunch, and shave ice piled into a sweet, dripping mountain, proof that even paradise runs on disagreement about whose grandmother's recipe came first. And underneath every single thing we have talked about so far, older than all of it, predating the boats and the borders and the arguments, is the food that was here first. Native American cuisine handed the entire continent its foundation. Corn, beans, and squash. The so-called 3 sisters grown together in one mound because each one helps the other survive. Plus turkey, cranberries, wild rice, sunflower seeds, the ingredients that quietly built half the dishes already mentioned in this video, and then got their credit stolen along the way. Without this pantry, there is no Thanksgiving, no cornbread, no chili, no popcorn, none of it. And then there is fry bread, a flat, golden, fried disc of dough that has become a powerful and complicated symbol across many tribes, beloved at every gathering and quietly painful at the same time, because it was born of necessity during forced relocation, made from the government commodity rations of white flour, lard, sugar, and powdered milk that were handed out when people were marched off their land and away from everything they used to grow and hunt. It is genuinely delicious, golden and chewy, and piled with toppings into the Indian taco, and it tastes, underneath that, like survival, which is a far heavier thing to hold in your hand than a recipe. And it sits right there at the table anyway, claimed and argued over and made with pride, which might be the most American thing on this entire menu. So here we are, having crossed a country that swears it has no cuisine while hiding one of the most contradictory food cultures on the planet. And the final joke is that the most American dishes are usually the ones that came from somewhere else and got rebuilt in a borrowed kitchen. Chop suey and General Tso's, invented on American soil by Chinese cooks and unknown in China. Italian-American pizza and fist-sized meatballs a real Nana would disown. There is no single American dish, there never was. There's just this endless, bad-tempered family dinner where everyone's grandmother did it right and everyone else's did it wrong, where the brisket guy is still in the doorway, where somewhere a new Mexican is yelling Christmas, and where, honestly, that's just how it's eaten.